LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the July 23rd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's dozen best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. And also, again, as for those who asked me to use my law degree, I will be committing legal analysis on the pardon issue. I'll be holding up my copy of the Constitution and talking about whether Donald Trump can pardon himself, pardon members of his administration. If you actually click on my poll up in the corner here, you'll see that I'm asking for your prediction as to whether Trump will pardon himself, people from his administration or campaign, or both, or neither. That's one of the big issues this week. Actually, I have my clips from the usual, it's from the big five corporate outlets, but there was no NBC's Meet the Press, so I'm taking a clip from MSNBC's AM Joy instead, and then that gives me the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, except NBC's replaced by MSNBC. There's no political comedy this week, but I do have just a short excerpt of political comedy. I don't know, I found it amusing, comedic. It was a quick retort from Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union talking to the new White House Communications Director, Anthony Scaramucci, and I'll have several Scaramucci clips this evening. This one that I took a short clip from for the political comedy, I call that sort of like Jake and Scaramucci do the fandango for the Queen fans out there. I don't know, maybe that's my version of political comedy, but there was no really good news summary of the big developments this week, so I thought I'd just give you the summary myself, that there was, I'm talking this week as the topic is Trump, Russia pardons, and other possible constitutional crises, because the two big issues this week were Trump. First, he went and talked to the New York Times in an interview, and he criticized Robert Mueller, the special counsel, and he criticized his own attorney general, Jeff Sessions, that made it seem like he might fire one or both of them, which would create a constitutional crisis. That'll be a topic I cover more at the end of the clips. But he also talked, supposedly, according to a Washington Post story, about whether he might pardon himself or members of his administration. That's another possible constitutional crisis. And then in the middle of all of it, he had this big communications shakeup. Sean Spicer is out, Anthony Scaramucci is in, and now Sarah Huckabee Sanders is the new press secretary. And like I said, I want to start with maybe some political comedy from Jake Tapper and Anthony Scaramucci on CNN's State of the Union. Jake Tapper coming up with a quick retort when Anthony Scaramucci tried to play down the idea that Trump was talking about pardons, and I will talk about that a little more with you after we watch that 39-second clip from CNN this morning here.
The president's thinking about pardoning nobody because it has been coming up a lot. There's an undercurrent of nonsensical stuff.
Because he has asked advisors about it.
No, come on, Jake. He's not allowed that. This is the problem with the whole system. He's the president of the United States. If I turn to one of my staff members at Skybridge, I ask them a question, they run out to the news media and tell everything that I'm thinking about. Is that fair to the president?
If you turn to one of your partners at Skybridge and say,
Jake,
hey, do you have $100,000 for bail money in case I need it? Yes. Then people are going to say, why is he talking about bail money? The question...
That's ridiculous. Jake, that's that's a super ridiculous hypothetical, and I appreciate you're on the fly trying to think of them.
Was it a super ridiculous hypothetical? Actually, I thought that was on the fly a pretty good hypothetical, or a good analogy, where you're asking advice on something that makes you sound guilty, and the thing is, people report on it because it makes you sound guilty. And like I said, I will be showing a much longer version of that, like over 5.5-minute version of that in a little while, when I show the two clips of Anthony Scaramucci having his fandango with Jake Tapper there on CNN State of the Union. But I actually wanted to start with one clip of the president's lawyer, Jake Sekulow, who did the full Ginsburg last week, and I showed so many clips of him. He also took on this pardon issue. And so I want to show a clip of him, and before I get to the several Anthony Scaramucci clips that actually kind of contradict what Jay Sekulow says in this clip. You'll see Jay Sekulow says the president hasn't discussed this, no one's discussed this with the president, and in the next three clips from Anthony Scaramucci I'll show he kind of contradicts what Jay Sekulow said to George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week this morning over here.
The president's thinking about pardoning nobody because it has been coming up a lot. There's an undercurrent of nonsensical stuff.
Because he has asked advisors about it.
No, come on, Jake. He's not allowed that. This is the problem with the whole system. He's the president of the United States. If I turn to one of my staff members at Skybridge, I ask them a question, they run out to the news media and tell everything that I'm thinking about. Is that fair to the president?
If you turn to one of your partners at Skybridge and say,
Jake,
hey, do you have $100,000 for bail money in case I need it? Yes. Then people are going to say, why is he talking about bail money? I mean, so the question...
That's ridiculous. Jake, that's like that's a super ridiculous hypothetical, and I appreciate you're on the fly trying to think of them.
Sorry, I'm having streaming problems and I replayed that clip by mistake. I apologize for that. It took me like all the way to the end of the clip to realize that I had replayed the same clip from the beginning. I appreciate also the super chat contribution I just got from Sang Mang for $10. I'm about to check out that Supreme Court case you cited, but let me get to the George Stephanopoulos clip with Jay Sekulow, I promised, before I got distracted over here.
This tweet that President Trump sent out yesterday morning. He said, while all agree that the U.S. president has the complete power to pardon, why think of it when the only crime so far is leaks against us, fake news? I wonder if you can explain what the president means by that complete power to pardon. Does he believe he has the right to pardon himself?
Well, the president in that tweet stated something that's rather unremarkable, and that is that under the Constitution, under Article 2, Section 2, the president has the authority to pardon. But I want to be clear on this, George. We have not and continue to not have conversations with the president of the United States regarding pardons. Pardons have not been discussed, and pardons are not on the table. With regard to the issue of a president pardoning himself, there's a big academic discussion going on right now, an academic debate. You've got Professor Tribe arguing one point, you got Professor Turley arguing another point, and while it makes for interesting academic discussions, let me tell you what the legal team is not doing. We're not researching the issue because the issue of pardons is not on the table. There's nothing to pardon from.
As you know, the Washington Post reported that you were discussing it this week, that the president even asked about it. I take it you're denying that article, but I want to put up a judgment from the Office of Legal Counsel back in 1974 under Richard Nixon. They said under the fundamental rule that no one may be a judge in his own case, the president cannot pardon himself. You're a constitutional lawyer. Do you believe the president can pardon himself?
I don't think that you can, that first of all, it's never been adjudicated. Whether a president could pardon himself because it's not happened. But clearly the Constitution does vest a plenary pardon power within the presidency. Whether it would apply to the president himself, I think ultimately would be a matter for a court to decide if it were to ever come into an existence. As I said, that's not something that we're looking at. But from a constitutional legal perspective, you can't dismiss it one way or the other. I think it's a question that would ultimately, if put in place, would probably have to be adjudicated by the Supreme Court to determine constitutionality. The document itself, when we talk about the document, the Constitution, Article 2 is very clear. The president has the power to pardon. But again, there's academics are arguing both sides of this. And as I said, we're not researching it. I haven't researched it because it's not an issue we're concerned with or dealing with.
So you think it's an open question. Let me move on to Special Counsel Mueller.
So there you can see Jay Sekulow, the president's lawyer, claim that it's an open legal question, which I actually also agree with. In fact, if you look at my little predictive poll here, I do believe that the president can pardon others. Whether he can pardon himself is an open question. And I'm going to show a Rand Paul clip in a little while that shows the way the Supreme Court may end up on that. If you check out your Constitution here, Article 2, Section 2, the end of the first paragraph says the president shall have power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States except in cases of impeachment. That's what my ACLU Constitution of the United States says. By the way, if you want an ACLU Constitution, you can go to the National ACLU website and go to their online store. They sell these there. I happen to have several of them that I give out at various events. And what Jay Sekulow said is true, that has never been adjudicated as to whether the president has the power to pardon himself. Hopefully it will never come to that, although that's the poll question I'm asking that you can click on over here. But what was really interesting, partway through, you saw Jay Sekulow deny the Washington Post story and say that there had been no discussion with the president about pardons. And you'll see in the next 3 clips, Anthony Scaramucci, the new communications director, who during his interview said he's good friends with Jay Sekulow, apparently did not get their messages straight about what they were going to say the president had discussed, because you'll see Anthony Scaramucci in these various clips says that he discussed it with the president discussed it with someone in the Oval Office, maybe even in his study. That's like the 3rd clip I'm going to show, but this is actually the extended version of the clip I mistakenly showed twice at the beginning of the program, with Anthony Scaramucci talking to Jake Tapper, and you'll see about 2/3 of the way through this clip, he does ask him about whether it's a evidence of guilt if someone's asking you to have bail money ready for them, or evidence at least that there's something fishy going on. And this is the full context of that clip from CNN.
This weekend, in a tweet, that he has the complete power to pardon. This is what he wrote, quote, "While all agree the U.S. president has the complete power to pardon, why think of that when only crime so far is leaks against U.S., fake news?" Anthony, who's the president thinking about pardoning?
Well, he doesn't. You just read the tweet again. You want to go over the tweet one more time? Because I'm a pretty good proofreader. He's basically saying he doesn't have to pardon anybody.
So
That's
far.
what he's saying.
So far. He said.
No, he.
I'll read the tweet again.
Let's
read it again. I'll read it again.
Let's put the tweet back up there.
While all
agree,
all agree the U.S. president has the complete power to pardon, why think of that when only crime so far, which is also an interesting phrase, only crime so far, is leaks against us, fake news? So he's talking about pardoning, so who's he thinking of pardoning?
Jake, let's cut through it all, okay? You and I right here, let's cut through it all. You're basically saying that tweet is suggesting that the president's going to pardon himself and every one of his family members.
I asked you.
What are you suggesting?
I'm saying
he's not going to do that.
No, Anthony, I am suggesting one thing. The president tweeted about pardons, and I'm asking you, who's he thinking about pardoning? That's all I'm suggesting. So why raise it?
The president's thinking about pardoning nobody because it has been coming up a lot. There's an undercurrent of nonsensical stuff.
Because he has asked advisors about it.
No, come on, Jake. He's not allowed that. This is the problem with the whole system. He's the president of the United States. If I turn to one of my staff members at Skybridge, I ask them a question, they run out to the news media and tell everything that I'm thinking about. Is that fair to the president?
If you turn to one of your partners at Skybridge and say,
Jake,
hey, do you have $100,000 for bail money in case I need it? Yes. Then people are going to say, why is he talking about bail money? I mean, so the question...
That's ridiculous. Jake, that's that's a super ridiculous hypothetical, and I appreciate you're on the fly trying to think of them. But the truth of the matter is that the president's not going to have to pardon anybody because the Russian thing is a nonsensical thing. I was there early on in the campaign. I didn't have any interactivity with Russians. I didn't see anybody have any interactivity with Russians. It is a complete bogus and nonsensical thing, and this is the stuff that happens in Washington I honestly don't like. It's Scandals Incorporated.
We know...
You guys have to manufacture these scandals to take the president off of his agenda. We're going to put the president right back on his agenda.
There is an
and we're going to
FBI
present him the way
investigation.
he needs to be presented to the American people.
There is an FBI investigation. There is a Senate Intelligence Committee investigation. Republicans control the Senate. There is a House Intelligence Committee investigation. Republicans control the House. None of that is manufactured. None of that.
Have they found any evidence that the president or anybody in the campaign has colluded with the Russians, Jake?
I don't know.
Okay, well, you know what? A lot of people have said that. You know, like you're saying with 100% certainty that they have affected the election or they turned over the emails. There's a lot of people that are saying with 100% certainty that there was not one person in the Trump campaign that colluded with the Russians. Paul Manafort's going to testify this week.
Yeah.
My very close friend Jared Kushner is going to testify tomorrow. I predict that will be the last time Jared Kushner talks about the Russians. Okay.
Well, here's the thing. You said that there was...
He's a very honest guy,
Jake. You said... I have no reason to think Jared's not honest.
Yeah, he's very honest. So he'll be done testifying. There's nothing to the story, and we'll be moving on.
You said just a few minutes ago that nobody in the campaign met with anybody
That I
any
saw,
Russians?
sir. That I saw.
Okay.
I don't
but
know.
we know.
I didn't attend every single meeting, but I
Right,
gotta tell
and you didn't
something.
attend the
I
one.
was very early in the campaign.
You didn't. Did you know about the meeting that Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort had with a number of Russians, including that woman, Natalia Veselnitskaya?
I didn't know about the meeting, but what I don't like about the way the thing was handled from a communications and strategy perspective, I think Donald Trump Jr. got bad advice. They told him to put out a small statement. Donald Trump Jr. is a very honest, very high integrity person. I've known him for a long time. I have an enormous amount of respect for him. You know, the kid took a nothing meeting. I think Reince Priebus called it a nothing burger.
Would you take that meeting?
Since that's been overused, would I have taken that meeting? I'm not sure. How's that? I'm gonna answer it honestly and tell you that I'm not sure. Since I went to Harvard Law School, I probably would have asked a few people, and somebody probably would have said to me, you know, get a cutout to go take the meeting and see if there's any legitimacy to it. Once they realized there was no legitimacy to it, people were walking out or they were on their iPhones. It was a non-event, Jake. We want to make that into a 2-week, a 4-week news cycle. That's fine, but it was a non-event, and it had no impact on the campaign.
The only reason I brought it up is because you said nobody from the campaign met with anybody from Russia. Let me ask you this question about the pardon, and then we'll move on. Does the White House believe?
Time out a second. Let me restate that. I said no. I didn't see anybody do that, and nobody in my knowledge for the last year.
But my point is, just because you didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't happen. You didn't see that one, and that one happened.
I agree with that, but that was a ridiculous nothing meeting.
Okay. Does the White House believe that the president has the power to pardon himself?
I don't know. I don't think we haven't even really looked into that. I don't know. I've talked to Jay Sekulow about that because he's a scholar, and you know, I took constitutional law from Larry Tribe, and if Professor Tribe's listening, I know he doesn't like the president, but I did get an A- in your course. I'm not sure if he has the right to power himself or not, but it doesn't matter anyway, because that's another one of those stupid hypotheticals. He's not going to have to pardon himself because he's done absolutely nothing wrong. So we don't even have to worry about it. Let's let the next president answer that question for you. I don't think we even need to be discussing it.
My colleague Andrew Kaczynski noted that back in...
So there's the first example of Anthony Scaramucci basically refuting what Jay Sekulow said in the previous clip talking to George Stephanopoulos, where he said there's been no discussion of pardons. That whole Washington Post story is not true. Well, there you heard Anthony Scaramucci say maybe they did it in the Oval Office. And did you hear when he was talking there to Jake Tapper about whether he would have taken that June 2016 meeting that Donald Trump Jr. took? He said, well, I wouldn't have done it. I would have used a cutout. And if you look up the term cutout, it's like an espionage term for like a person you can use to get information as a go-between who, you know, gives you deniability as having, you know, not really done anything in terms of that contact. I mean, it's a very odd choice of words, I thought. And of course, there was that whole like bail discussion that I used from the original clip, so I thought that was pretty good questioning by Jake Tapper. I'm going to criticize Jake Tapper's questioning a little bit later. He has one good follow-up and then a bad follow-up later, but before I get to that, I want to show a couple more clips of Anthony Scaramucci, who is contradicting the President Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, about whether this pardon issue has been discussed. And here he is contradicting it on Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace, I think, did the worst job of following up on the misleading statements from Anthony Scaramucci, as I will discuss with you after I watch that clip with you over here.
Let me ask you one last Russia question, then I want to talk about agenda. In a tweet this week, the president said this weekend. He asserted his complete power to pardon. Question, if he and his people have done nothing wrong, why even talk about pardons?
You see, this is one of those things about Washington, and it's the convolution and the nature of things. I'm in the Oval Office with the president last week. We're talking about that. He says he brought that up. He says, but he doesn't have to be pardoned. There's nobody around him that has to be pardoned. He was just making the statement about the power of pardon. And so now all of the speculation and all the spin is, oh, he's going to pardon himself and do all this other nonsense. The president does not need to pardon himself. And the reason he doesn't need to pardon himself is that he hasn't done anything wrong.
Okay.
And so for me, we can microanalyze every one of the president's tweets. That's fine. We can go in that direction. But what I want to do for people is get it back on the president's agenda. This is a jobs president. This is a president that's going to help middle-class families, lower middle-class families. You want to talk about gaps, Chris? There is a wide income gap that many elites do not feel, but the president feels it, and members of his staff feel it, and people in the middle of America feel it. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to put policies together that close that gap. If people want to talk about these nonsensical scandals, I'll let them do that, but I'm going to be missile-locked on focusing on the president's agenda and helping people to understand the president the way I know him and the way I love him.
I got to ask you one last question, and I hesitate to do that, but does the president still have full confidence in his attorney general? He has had some tough things to say about Jeff Sessions this weekend and his decision to recuse. And then there's this news story in the Washington Post that the Russian ambassador supposedly told his superiors that he had talked with Sessions about campaign matters with Sessions tonight. Does the president still have confidence in Sessions?
See, this is something I think is super important. A question like that, I want to leave that for the president and Attorney General Sessions to talk about themselves. My guess is that he's in the seat, and so therefore the president still has confidence in him. I'm sure, like all of us, there's things that Attorney General Sessions has done that the president doesn't like, and let them have that conversation amongst themselves, and hopefully we can fix it. But Chris, here's the thing. The good news about President Trump is that he wears a lot on his sleeve. We know exactly where he comes from and where he stands on things. The reason why the American people love him and the reason why he became president is because he's a, wears heart on his sleeve type of person, very caring. But also, as a good business executive, he sort of tells people how he feels.
All right.
But again, another thing I don't like about Washington, if I don't like something that you're saying, and I put out a tweet and say I don't like Chris Wallace, all of a sudden now you and I have to be mortal enemies for the rest of our lives. I don't think that's how it works in American business, and so we sort of need to stop doing that in the political system.
Okay. Speaking.
So I don't think that there was much of a follow-up there on the whole pardon question from Chris Wallace, although his next question on whether the president has confidence in his attorney general, that's going to be a whole second issue I'm going to cover, and I'm going to explain why that could be its whole other constitutional crisis in addition to this whole pardon constitutional crisis. And I'm going to get to my legal analysis and also that Supreme Court case that Sang Maing mentioned in that super chat contribution for my live viewers, and I apologize to the live viewers if the audio and video is out of sync. There was one bad streaming problem at the beginning, and that basically messes everything up for the rest of the show. Hopefully in the recorded version it will all be fixed, or if not, I'll upload the recorded version of the show. But anyway, before I finish my legal analysis of the pardons, I want to show one more clip of Anthony Scaramucci talking about whether the president is discussing the whole pardon issue. Remember, Jay Sekulow in that previous clip I showed said there's been no discussion, and I've showed Anthony Scaramucci a couple times saying, well, maybe he talked about it in the Oval Office. In this one, it's the Oval Office or the study. So there may have been like multiple conversations about pardons, according to Anthony Scaramucci, completely contradicting what Jay Sekulow said earlier, as you can see in this clip about a minute and a half, talking to John Dickerson on CBS's Face of the Nation over here.
The president was asking his advisors about his power to pardon. His aides and himself were knocked down by the president's lawyer, only to be reanimated by the president himself, who declared on Saturday that he had complete power to pardon. And we want to welcome the incoming White House Communications Director, Anthony Scaramucci, to the broadcast. Mr. Scaramucci, welcome to Face the Nation. I want to start with the president's tweet yesterday about pardons. He said he has complete pardon power. Why is he tweeting about pardons?
Well, I think that unfortunately he may have had a conversation in the Oval Office or somewhere about it, and then people rush out to leak that information to people. It's just very unprofessional and very harmful. And I think that the gist of that leak, basically, or that tweet, I should say, is that he's not going to pardon anybody. He doesn't need to pardon anybody, and it's just really about the leaking that is actually injurious to the government, felonious to the government. But he's done absolutely nothing wrong, and there's no need for him to pardon anybody. But he just doesn't like the fact that he has a 2-minute conversation in the Oval Office or in his study, and then people are running out and leaking that. And so we're going to work on culturally changing that, because it's extremely unprofessional. He's the commander-in-chief, the president of the United States. The people that are standing around him that are doing that sort of nonsense are actually un-American. They're doing an injustice to the institution of the American presidency, and we're going to work very hard to change the culture of that.
What happens to leakers on your watch?
They're going to get fired. I'm just going to make it very...
And actually, Anthony Scaramucci talked a bunch on a couple different programs about how he's going to be really tough on the leakers and he's going to fire people who leak. But I thought it was interesting in that clip on CBS's Face the Nation that he not only said that Trump may have talked about pardons in the Oval Office, but also maybe in his study. And it seems like there may have been 2 conversations if you put all those clips, those last 3 clips together. Like, first there was some conversation that Trump had maybe with Jay Sekulow, and then there was a later conversation where Trump talked to Anthony Scaramucci himself about his previous conversations. It was like one in the Oval Office, one in the study, or I don't know. You can let me know what you make of those 3 clips and how they contradict the story from Jay Sekulow in the previous clip. But before I get to my quick legal analysis of the pardon situation, whether the president can pardon himself, I want to show Rand Paul's legal analysis as to how the Supreme Court might come down on this and how it contradicts this editorial in the Washington Post from Supreme Court scholar Lawrence Tribe. And I will discuss all those issues after we watch this 90-second Rand Paul clip from CNN's State of the Union talking to Jake Tapper this morning over here.
Who cites the Constitution all the time, holds it up as an important document. I'm wondering about your view. The Washington Post reported this week President Trump has asked his advisors about his power to pardon aides, family members, and even himself. As an amateur constitutional scholar, if I can call you that, in your opinion, does the president have the authority to pardon himself?
I think in all likelihood he does. I think that some of this hasn't been adjudicated. I think what the courts typically find is when something happens politically between separation of powers or between a power of one particular body, a lot of times they kind of say it's up to the electors to decide this. And so a lot of things get kicked back into a political sphere. I think in a political sphere, I would caution someone to think about pardoning themselves or family members or et cetera. But I also understand his frustration because, you know, what's going on here, and I think the person who put it best is a guy named Herbert Butterfield, who wrote The Whig Interpretation of History. And he said if you look back at something, history, even recent history, and you say, well, there must be collusion, you find it everywhere you look, because every time someone met with a Russian, you think, oh, it's part of the master conspiracy plan, when in reality it's your mind creating some sort of linearity to history or meaning to history that is actually much more random.
The dulcet tones of Herbert Butterfield. Thank you so much, Senator Rand Paul. It's always good to have you on. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That dulcet tones of Herbert Butterfield, I don't know, maybe that should have been my introductory political comedy clip, but I actually agree somewhat with the second thing Rand Paul said. I kind of made that argument last week when I had Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press giving this whole timeline of the Russia scandal, and I said it was kind of like a prosecutor's timeline where they were putting all these things next to each other that maybe weren't connected to each other and trying to make them, you know, sort of like these events are guilty because they are associated with each other in our timeline, but there may not be association between them. And I'm not saying that there won't eventually be association between those various events, but the evidence remains to, there's still not the evidence to connect all the things that Chuck Todd in his Russia scandal timeline talked about last week. And so I guess the Herbert Butterfield argument may have some application. But what Rand Paul said at the beginning there about the pardon power and how it may actually be a political dispute between the legislative and executive branches. There are various topics where the Supreme Court says, we're not going to rule on this. This is a struggle of powers between the other two branches, which means, the president can use his pardon power, and the remedy is for the Congress to use its impeachment power. And the courts aren't going to get in the middle of that. It's like up to the other two branches. That kind of happens on like the war powers, where the president uses his commander-in-chief power to, like, Bill Clinton did this bombing in Bosnia, and there was an attempt by the Congress to, they couldn't really get a resolution passed to cut off funds to that, and then, eventually the congressional remedy for things the president is doing that they think aren't authorized or they don't like, it's impeachment. And so that's one possible constitutional crisis. Now, Lawrence Tribe, who is a great constitutional scholar, made this argument that the president can't pardon himself because it goes against the whole structure of the Constitution, where you can't be both a judge and a defendant in the same case, and there are all sorts of clauses in the Constitution against self-dealing. But like I said when I showed you the Constitution at the beginning, Article 2, Section 2 there, basically doesn't say whether the president can pardon himself, so it's an open question. I noticed I did get this great super chat contribution from Sang Mang on this case, Burdick versus the United States. Here's that. Here's a. I don't know if you could read that, but Sang Mang is one of my great Patreon patrons who's been supporting me, basically my biggest patron for the longest amount of time. So I'm really grateful to people who give these super chat contributions and who are my patrons on Patreon, especially because since last April, I think YouTube has been monetizing about 15% of my video views. It was like 5% last April, and it's slowly crept up to about 15% of my video views are monetized. If you're watching this as a recorded show, you're probably not watching it with advertising, so that's why I'm so appreciative of the people who give these super chat contributions and who are my monthly patrons on Patreon. That's even better. That's something I can depend on. It used to be about a third of my revenue, and advertising revenue was about 2/3. Now it's like 75% of my revenue. So thanks to those supporters. And to answer Sang Mang's question about Burdick versus the United States, that's a really old case from 1915 that basically says a pardon isn't operative until it's entered into criminal court. And I don't know whether a presidential pardon of himself would actually have to be entered into criminal court, or members of his administration and campaign. But the real meaning of that case is, in my opinion, that if the president issues a pardon, it's basically an admission that there is, if it's like a preemptive pardon before there's an indictment or criminal prosecution, it's basically an admission of criminal guilt and could be the basis for impeachment. But that again is up to the Congress and whether the Republican Congress is willing to do that, or we could wait till 2018 or the beginning of 2019 and a new Congress, and maybe the Democrats can win and they'll have the House of Representatives. It's a difficult uphill battle, but if the president does enough things, they get enough of the people of the American electorate outraged, maybe that will happen. But I appreciate that super chat contribution and the long-term support from Sang Mang, and so I wanted to comment on that U.S. Supreme Court case that Sang Mang asked about on the pardon question. And now I want to move on to this other possible constitutional crisis involving the criticism by Donald Trump of the special counsel and the criticism of even his own attorney general. But I want to start with this really long back and forth. This is, I suppose, the real Jake and Scaramucci do the Fandango clip, because this is over 6 minutes long, where Jake Tapper is trying to get Anthony Scaramucci to admit that there is some evidence behind the whole Russia scandal. And you'll see that Scaramucci tries to start off claiming that some anonymous person told him maybe if the Russians really had hacked our election, we never would have known about it because they have that level of... And this seems like something Trump might have heard from Putin, because you'll see eventually Anthony Scaramucci admits that the anonymous person who told him this was Donald Trump calling him from Air Force One, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together. It's a little over 6 minutes, but Jake Tapper did, I think, 29 minutes of interview with Anthony Scaramucci this morning on State of the Union. No commercial interruption, so I had to show a couple clips from it. And this is one I wanted to discuss with you after we watch it together here.
An agreement on sanctions to punish Russia for its election meddling and aggression towards its neighbors. Is President Trump going to sign the Russian sanctions bill?
We got to ask President Trump that. You know, it's my second or third day on the job. My guess is that he's going to make that decision shortly. But, you know, there's a lot of questions out there, Jake. I mean, you know, and this is another thing I don't like about the process. This man, our president, he has phenomenal instincts. A lot of the stuff that people have said in the mainstream media that was supposedly true turned out that it wasn't true. I think there was 3 or 4 weeks ago, there were 17 intelligence agencies that were saying something. Then we realized that there was only 4 intelligence agencies. And I'm not saying 4 intelligence agencies is insignificant. I'm just saying there's a lot of disinformation out there. You know, somebody said to me yesterday, I won't tell you who, that if the Russians actually hacked this situation and spilled out those emails, you would have never seen it. You would have never had any evidence of them, meaning that they're super confident in their deception skills in hacking. My point is, all of the information isn't on the table yet. But here's what I know about the president.
Wait, Anthony.
Let me finish.
Well, you're making a lot of assertions here. I don't know who this anonymous person is that said that if the Russians had actually done it, we wouldn't have been able to detect it. But it is the unanimous.
How about it was the president, Jake?
Okay, it's the consensus of the intelligence community.
He called me from Air Force One,
yeah,
and he basically said to me, "Hey, you know, this is maybe they did it, maybe they didn't do it, and I'm gonna maintain for you." Hold on a second.
But this is exactly the issue here. We have experts, the U.S. intelligence agencies, unanimous, both Obama appointees and Trump appointees, the director of national intelligence, the head of the National Security Agency, the head of the FBI. I mean, all of these intelligence experts saying Russia hacked the election. They tried to interfere in the election. No votes were changed, but there was this disinformation and misinformation campaign. President Trump is contradicting it, and you're siding with President Trump.
Well, I didn't say that I was siding with President Trump. He hasn't made the decision yet to sign that bill one way or the other. And so when he makes that decision, I will 100% side with him, because I'm his communications director and I'm his advocate on a show like this. Last time I checked, the way the founding fathers put the Constitution together, they made one person the commander-in-chief. It happens to be President Donald J. Trump. He'll make that decision when he makes it, and then I'll come back on the show and I'll explain it to you, and I'll explain to you why he made the decision that way. But what I'm saying to you, and you may not want to agree with me, and we can litigate this, there's a lot of disinformation out there, Jake. And so one of the things I'm going to try to do is speak very transparently to you and the American people, get the president's message out there. I have found in my life experience with President Trump, when he's out there himself and he's being his fresh, authentic self, it's very appealing to the people of the United States. And we don't need to closet him up or coach him on certain things. What we need to do is allow him to be himself, so that we can get these policies out there that are going to be very good for the American people.
But this is exactly the point, because here you have a bill, legislation that was passed 98-2 in the U.S. Senate. The House is about to pass it. It will probably also be an overwhelming vote to sanction Russia. And President Trump told you that he still doesn't believe that Russia was trying to interfere in the election, even though the overwhelming body of the U.S. Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, and his own intelligence experts are telling him the opposite. You're saying you're going to side with the president. Don't you owe a duty to the truth?
Well, what about the conversation are you missing, Jake? There are checks and balances in the system for a reason, okay? The president will make that decision when he makes a decision. You're telling me that something is true, that in fact could in fact be true. I don't have the information in front of me. Once once I've cleared my security clearances and I've looked at the stuff, if I think it's true, behind closed doors, I'll turn to the president very directly and say, sir, I think this stuff is true, but I don't have it in front of me right now. Here's what I know about the president. You may not like it. He's got phenomenal instincts. You may not like it. He's got great judgment on people. You may not like it, but he's a phenomenal politician. He started 2 short years ago, and he's already 6 months into his presidency. How many people can do that, Jake? Be an American, successful business person and television personality, hit a button on June 16th, 2015, and race his way to the presidency, clearing out 18 people. You know a lot of people that can do that? I don't know a lot of people that can do that.
It was there's no question. It was a phenomenal victory. It was a huge surprise. It shocked the system. He proved all the pundits wrong. All of that's true, and it was true as of November 8th. Right. My question right now is about the fact that a geopolitical foe of the United States, Russia, interfered in the U.S. election, according to every intelligence expert, both under the Obama administration and under the Trump administration. The one person in the government who says it's not true is President Trump.
Well, again, one of the reasons why he is upset about it is that the mainstream media position on this, that they interfered in the election, it actually, in his mind, what are you guys suggesting? You're going to delegitimize his victory?
No.
Is that going to make his victory illegitimate?
No.
Is that the point of it? Well, you know what? He legitimately won the presidency.
Absolutely.
Right? Do we both agree on that?
He legitimately won the presidency.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. So at the end of the day, let him make the decision. And as I said to you, once I've got a security clearance and I meet with those people myself, if I think it's true, I'm going to turn to the president very honestly. We have a great relationship. Say, sir, I think this is true.
Well, that's good that you'll do that, Anthony. But the point is kind of like
it doesn't right now on the show.
But it's almost irrelevant whether you think it's true and what President Trump says, because it's the unanimous consensus of the intelligence community that this happened, and it is a threat to the United States because Russia is going to try to do it again. That is also the consensus.
I got all that, but let me tell you something. The person that's going to be super.
And it went on from there. You know, it's hard to cut the clips from the Jake Tapper Anthony Scaramucci interview because, like I said, it went on for like 28 minutes, no commercial interruptions, and there were only a few questions, and almost all the rest of it was follow-up questions. And you see Jake Tapper kind of hit gold with that one follow-up question. It's almost like Anthony Scaramucci was waiting for, who is your anonymous source? Well, would you believe it was Donald Trump calling me from Air Force One and saying, Russia, if they had done this, maybe we wouldn't be able to know about it at all. It sounds like maybe something Vladimir Putin told him during G20. I don't know. That seems like I might have even heard Vladimir Putin make that argument in one of his previous. He's gone through so many different stories on whether Russia was involved or maybe it was patriotic Russian hackers not involved with the government, or then he changed that story again. But I thought Jake Tapper, like I said, hit gold with that follow-up question, but then I think he was a little bit too quick to say, of course, President Trump's election was legitimate. There was no change in votes, he said, by which I think he means, there was no hacking of voting machines, which is pretty clear, though there are even some stories that may show that. But the fact that it didn't affect the election, that remains to be seen. And whether Trump is legally the president, the Electoral College voted and he's the president. I said that from the very beginning. He's legally president of the United States, but the word legitimate, that could mean a lot of different things. And I think Jake Tapper was a little bit quick to give that over to Anthony Scaramucci. But did you notice in a couple different ways, Scaramucci also hurt his own credibility? He showed that what he says isn't true. First, when he said, I'm not going to say who this anonymous source is who told me about why Russia couldn't have hacked the election, and then a minute later he's saying, well, it was Donald Trump. So that sort of hurts his credibility, although it could be some play where he was planning on doing that. But then also he kind of admitted, if he ends up believing that Russia is responsible for the election hacking, but Trump isn't saying that, he'll say that personally to the president, but he didn't say that he'll start saying it publicly, because he's going to say whatever Trump says because that's his job as communications director, and I think he made that pretty clear. So I wanted to show that that's the last Anthony Scaramucci clip, but he did, I think, 3 of the 4 programs. There was no NBC's Meet the Press, like I said this morning. But I want to show now a clip of Senator Al Franken reacting to a clip from that last clip I showed you, the part where Anthony Scaramucci said that Donald Trump still is calling him from Air Force One and telling him maybe it wasn't the Russians responsible for the election hacking. And Al Franken finds that hard to believe. And then he also seems really primed to talk about the Attorney General controversy and what Jeff Sessions said in the Washington Post article about Ambassador Kislyak, which I'll talk about after we watch that Al Franken clip talking to Jake Tapper, where Jake Tapper starts off playing a small excerpt from the previous clip I showed you to Al Franken and gets his reaction over here.
Somebody said to me yesterday, I won't tell you who, that if the Russians actually hacked this situation and spilled out those emails, you would have never seen it. You would have never had any evidence of them, meaning that they're super confident in their deception skills and hacking. My point is, all of the information isn't on the table yet. But here's what I know about the president.
Wait, Anthony.
Let me finish.
Well, you're making a lot of assertions here. I don't know who this anonymous person is that said that if the Russians had actually done it, we wouldn't have been able to detect it. But it is the unanimous.
How about it was the president, Jake?
Okay, it's the consensus of the intelligence community.
He called me from Air Force One.
So,
I thought, when he brought it up, I thought it was a disinterested intelligence expert.
Originally.
Brought that up to him, yeah.
But actually,
you asked a good question.
But then I said, I don't know who this person is, and he said it was the president of the United States.
Yeah.
So here we have the unanimous consensus of both Obama administration and Trump administration intelligence community leaders, people that Trump appointed, Dan Coates, Mike Rogers, et cetera, and Mike Pompeo at the CIA, and President Trump still doesn't believe it.
That's what can you say? It's just bizarre. I mean, it's clear that, and we're seeing now that members of his campaign met with the Russians, even though they would testify before, say, the Judiciary Committee answering a question from, say, me.
Talking about Jeff Sessions.
Yeah, saying that he had not met with Russians during the campaign. Now it sounds like that Kislyak at least said they met in April, which is a meeting that he hasn't said that he had, in which they talked about subjects regarding the campaign and about Russia, about sanctions and.
Yeah, so you're talking about a Washington Post report that quotes former and current government officials saying that there are intercepts of Ambassador Kislyak talking with presumably the Kremlin or people back in Moscow, about his meetings with Sessions. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about the intercepts?
I don't. I mean, what I do know is what I read, which is that I guess someone in Kislyak's position can sometimes distort what he says when he's reporting back to build himself up. I also saw in those reports that Kislyak isn't that type. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that since Attorney General Sessions hasn't been terribly truthful regarding these things, that it's more likely that that what Kislyak was saying was the case.
Do you want Sessions to come back?
Now that's actually kind of sad there at the end, that we're at a point where a U.S. senator is saying that given their history, it's probably the ambassador from this foreign adversary, the Russian Ambassador Sergey Kislyak, who is more credible than the U.S. Attorney General, former U.S. Senator Jeff Sessions. And that is because of this Washington Post story. These rumors have been going on for all the way back to when James Comey testified, at least, that somehow there was some intelligence that made it necessary for Jeff Sessions to recuse himself, and that's one of the things that's gotten President Trump all upset with Jeff Sessions that he recused himself. He never would have appointed him if he was going to recuse himself. And then right after Trump made that criticism, this Washington Post story came out. I've heard a pundit, I think it was on AM Joy yesterday, which I don't have a clip of, one of the pundits saying that this means that maybe the Washington Post had this story for a long time, but they finally got a confirmation from someone in the Trump administration who's trying to hurt Jeff Sessions. I don't know, is Jeff Sessions going to get fired? Is this a prelude to the firing of Robert Mueller? That's the big constitutional crisis that I'm going to continue talking about with these next few clips. And that's kind of the issue that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the new press secretary, taking over for Sean Spicer at the press briefings, apparently, hopefully on camera, and she addressed this question and first started talking to George Stephanopoulos over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos as to whether the president's tweet about this Washington Post story actually confirmed the intercept of the Kislyak conversation, and I will talk about that with you after we watch that clip. This is sort of a long back and forth. This is the one Sarah Huckabee Sanders clip I have for you. It's about a little over 4.5 minutes with George Stephanopoulos, I think, doing a fairly good job of cross-examination, as I will discuss with you after we watch that together here.
Until the situation in Ukraine is fully resolved, and it certainly isn't right now.
So the president will sign that bill. That's a little news right there. I want to move.
Oh, and I forgot, it starts off there with Sarah Huckabee Sanders saying that Donald Trump is going to sign the sanctions bill, which is something that Anthony Scaramucci apparently didn't know or didn't coordinate with her, because he said he didn't know in that previous clip with Jake Tapper. She apparently knows that Trump is going to sign this Russian sanctions bill, but she's, you notice, emphasizing Russian activity in Ukraine, not hacking our election, which is a hoax and a bogus story, as you'll see in her discussion with George Stephanopoulos over here.
Until the situation in Ukraine is fully resolved, and it certainly isn't right now.
So the president will sign that bill. That's a little news right there. I want to move on now to the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. As you know, the president in a New York Times interview was very tough on the Attorney General this week, said he would never have appointed him had he known he was going to recuse himself from the Russia investigation, said that was unfair to the president. A new issue cropped up in the Washington Post over the weekend. Reports that an intelligence intercept showed that the Attorney General did indeed talk with the Russian ambassador about the campaign. The president responded to that in a tweet. He said, a new intelligence leak from the Amazon Washington Post, this time against AG Jeff Sessions. These illegal leaks, like Comey's, must stop. That appears to be a confirmation that the Attorney General was indeed talking to the Russian ambassador about the campaign.
I don't think so at all, Georgia. I completely disagree. I think the president's point is that there's a real problem with leaks. Whether they're actual leaks or not, there's an issue that there are constant stories, sometimes true, sometimes not, that are being leaked out of the intelligence community. We've had over 60 leaks in the first 6 months from the intelligence community, when the other administrations previous to us were in the single digits after the entire time. This is a real problem. There are people that are putting our national security at risk, and I think that is one of the most undertold stories so far in the first 6 months of this administration. There's a ton of focus on what I like to call Russia fever, which is a total made-up story about the president trying to take away the legitimacy of his victory in November, and we need to focus on these leaks. This is the only illegal thing that has taken place,
Sarah,
and it's a real serious problem.
As you know, part of what feeds the fever is the fact that the president and his associates have not been straight about exactly what happened. In fact, the Attorney General himself first said he never had a meeting with Russians. He revised that. Then he said he never talked about the campaign. Now you have this new intercept that says he did indeed talk about the campaign. I know you're upset about the leak, but if it is indeed true, is that okay with the president that the Attorney General was discussing the campaign with the Russian ambassador?
Again, I'm not going to comment on alleged illegal leak. I'm not going to get into the back and forth on that. I think if we're going to talk about issues with Russia, and I think that we certainly should, one of the first places we should look is at the $500,000 that Bill Clinton took from Russians while Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. If we want to talk about collusion, I think that's one of the first places we should look. They should ask for that money back, and I think that's where this focus should be. The media loves to talk about it only when it comes to President Trump, and they've been doing it for almost a year. They've come up with nothing when there's real issues, I think, with some of the activities that the Democrats took place in.
Sarah, in fact, you know that's not true. You know that for many months, you and the president and his team denied any contacts with the Russians. Just in the last couple of weeks, we've seen those contacts revealed. That's why Don Jr. is going to have to appear before the Senate. That's why Jared Kushner is appearing before the Senate this week as well. This is not a made-up story from the press. But I do want to focus in on the Attorney General right here as well, because you've said the president has confidence in the Attorney General, yet in that interview with the New York Times, he says he wouldn't have appointed him, that he was unfair. I just don't understand how you reconcile those two statements.
Look, the president knows that the attorney general is trying hard, and he appreciates that. But at the same time, he's disappointed that he chose to recuse himself. I don't think that that's inconsistent or hard to understand that there would be frustration with that.
And the president is still frustrated?
Certainly, but I think, again, he's mostly frustrated with the overall process. Look, there was a Wall Street Journal poll that came out this week that showed that the top 3 issues that Americans care about are immigration, healthcare, and jobs. The top 3 issues that the media cares about are Russia, Russia, and Russia. There's 15 times more coverage on Russia than on the 3 biggest issues that Americans care about. That's a problem. That's exactly the definition of Russia fever, and I think that's why people are so frustrated with Washington, and one of the reasons that Donald Trump became president in the first place, because you have that just complete opposite idea of what Americans care about. Donald Trump tapped into that. He's been able and willing to talk about it, and he's had a lot of success in those areas over the first 6 months of his office.
Well, in fact, the health care bill is stalled this week, and I do want to ask about that, but just let me make the point as well. We've never before seen an intelligence community reach a consensus judgment that a foreign adversary like Russia interfered in our election. We've never seen a special counsel appointed this quickly, 6 months in to the presidency. But let's talk about health care.
And then they go on to health care. But I think George Stephanopoulos, like I said, did a good job of pointing out the inconsistencies, the alternative facts coming from Sarah Huckabee Sanders in that clip there. But she did her best to represent the Trump administration position that there's nothing in this Russia scandal, even though there seems to be more and more in the Russia scandal every week. And as to whether it's going to come to a constitutional crisis, I showed the possible constitutional crisis regarding the pardon power in the earlier clips. And now I want to get to the last few clips that show more and more how the possible firing of Jeff Sessions or Rod Rosenstein or especially Robert Mueller, the special counsel, how that could lead to a real constitutional crisis. And I'm going to start, these are all Democrats to one extent or another. The first being Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, talking about these attacks on the Attorney General and on the special counsel in this case, which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together here.
Congressman, you are a former prosecutor. What did you make of the president's comments in the New York Times that he thought it would be a violation if the special counsel went looking into his finances?
Well, I had a couple impressions. First, the president is clearly worried that Bob Mueller is going to be looking into allegations, for example, that the Russians may have laundered money through the Trump organization. That is really something, in my opinion, he needs to look at, because what concerns me the most is anything that could be held over the president's head that could influence U.S. policy. That would be among the most powerful form of compromise. So I think it is something he needs to look at. It's something plainly the president is very concerned about, but clearly within the scope of Mueller's investigation. And I'll say this, in light of all the talk about Jeff Sessions lately, it does concern me that the president should bring this up now if it's an indication that he wants to somehow push Sessions out and get in a new attorney general who would then take Rod Rosenstein's place as supervising the Mueller investigation. If this is part of a longer-term stratagem to define or confine the scope of the Mueller investigation, that would be very concerning.
Rod Rosenstein being the Deputy Attorney General who oversees the investigation now. Speaking of Senator Sessions, there's been this report in the Washington Post, as Senator Collins said, it's an anonymous source about perhaps an intercept that was picked up, so caution is in order. But even if the Post is right, Senator Sessions said he didn't talk about the campaign. The allegation is he talked about Russia and Russia policy with the ambassador. Isn't that a perfectly fine thing for a senator to do, to talk to the Russian ambassador about policy and what a possible President Trump policy towards Russia might be?
Well, it wouldn't be objectionable if he had been straightforward and honest about it with the Senate. But of course, he initially denied having any such meetings, and then he acknowledged such meetings, but said that they weren't about the campaign. And I think that strains credulity, whether or not that Washington Post story is accurate. I think I share the assessment John McCain expressed earlier of deep skepticism that he was being sought out in his role as a member of the Armed Services Committee, rather than his very prominent role on the Trump campaign. So, this is a part of a pattern. If the members of the Trump team were honest and transparent and forthcoming about these things, it would raise a lot less questions. But of course, that has not been the case. And now we see evidence in those emails about the Don Jr. meeting, why they have been concealing these things. So quite as separate and apart from the Washington Post story, I think there's a lot about what the Attorney General has said that just doesn't hold much water and that we really do need to get to the bottom of.
What's your response to the administration officials?
And I think Adam Schiff is one of the best representatives of the insider Democratic view of the Trump-Russia scandal. Like I said, he's the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee. Mark Warner, who I had clips of last week, or a clip of last week, is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they're going to be probably the best spokespeople for those two investigations into the Russia scandal. And you saw there that Adam Schiff really focused on the attacks on Robert Mueller and how they were inappropriate, and the response from the, I guess, highest ranking Democrat in the Congress, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, was even stronger over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos asked him both about whether Trump can pardon himself and whether he can fire Robert Mueller. And you'll see Chuck Schumer almost ignored the whole pardon issue and went right to the firing of Robert Mueller and said it would cause a big, big crisis, which I will talk about a little bit more and show one more clip on after we watch that 45-second clip from ABC this morning here.
Things like this, and then abandon them for the hard right Koch brothers.
Final question. You heard Mr. Sekulow on this issue of whether the president can pardon himself. Do you believe the president can pardon himself? And what would it mean if he took the next step and at some point actually fired Robert Mueller?
If he fired Mueller or pardoned himself or someone close to him under investigation, it would be one of the greatest breaking of rule of law, of traditional democratic norms, of what our democracy is about. I think it would cause a cataclysm in Washington. I cannot imagine our Republican colleagues, including Ryan and Mitch McConnell, just standing by if he were to do either of those things. So I would strongly advise him not to.
Senator Schumer, thanks for your time this morning.
Thanks, George.
We're going to check back in with the roundtable.
So that is actually a more optimistic prediction of what would happen if President Trump fired the special counsel investigating the Russia scandal. According to Chuck Schumer, he thinks that Republicans, and especially Republican leaders, would break with Trump and it would be a big fight between the legislative and executive branch. But there's actually a more pessimistic view of what might happen. This is from a pundit. I normally don't take pundit clips. This is a commentator for theroot.com. His name is Dr. Jason Johnson, but I'm taking a clip from MSNBC's AM Joy because there was no NBC's Meet the Press, and AM Joy is a more pundity show, I guess, more opinion-oriented, but I actually watch it all the time. It's one of my favorite shows, along with All In with Chris Hayes, and I also like the Rachel Maddow show, but here's the clip I want to show of a more pessimistic view if Republicans don't react negatively to the firing of Jeff Sessions and the special counsel Robert Mueller. If that were to happen, it could actually be the end of democracy, as Dr. Jason Johnson explained to Joy-Ann Reid on MSNBC's AM Joy this morning here.
Yeah, this is one of those sort of end of democracy moments. I mean, if we're just absolutely candid about this. If the President of the United States fires his Attorney General, sort of a reverse, Bloody Saturday or Bloody Sunday from the 1970s, and basically says, I'm going to fire every single person who's actually investigating me, and the Republicans in Congress do nothing about it, that's kind of it. We no longer have the rule of law in this country. We no longer have a president, and we have a ruling party that does not care about the law or any sort of investigation. That is the precipice that we're actually on here. This is bigger than Jeff Sessions and his engaging in sort of bigoted policies about voting and immigration. This is bigger than Donald Trump and his concerns and his vast insecurities about his likely guilty family. This is about the core of American democracy. Can we accept a president who will simply destroy any attempts to hold him in check in the law? And if that's what happens here, we're all in trouble.
And that is the question, Beth. Do you detect?
So I don't know. What do you think? Is this how democracy ends? Is the pessimistic view what's actually going to happen? Is there actually going to be a firing of the Attorney General and the Special Counsel and a non-reaction from Republicans so that it becomes the new normal and Donald Trump doesn't really have any sort of accountability if there was any sort of collusion with Russia or a cover-up or any of these other things that may or may not happen? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. That's a pretty dark, pessimistic view. I hope Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff and the institutions, and I mean, that's what we're coming down to. We have to trust in the patriotic Republicans. Or the election of 2018, or I don't know how it's going to end. Maybe there won't be any pardons. That's the question I ask in my poll this week that you can answer by clicking over here in the corner. I appreciate all of you who showed up for the live show. I'm sorry about the sync issues, and I noticed along the way during the broadcast I actually got a new patron on Patreon, so you can become a patron on Patreon for $1, like this new person. I think it was Steven Checks who just became a patron. Thanks, Steven, for that. Or $1, $5. I think the average is like $5 or $6 per month, and that really helps me now that the YouTube ad revenue has been so diminished from what it used to be. And anyway, I don't know if democracy is going to be ending, if it's going to end with the Trump administration, but I guess I'll keep covering it for you every week, every Sunday, checking out how the mainstream media, the big five corporate outlets cover it as best I can, and I'll be back next week around the same time, and until then, or until I have some opportunity to upload some other kind of video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.